And we're back with another episode of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here from ISFF, Inside Sports Fantasy Football, also as well, the Pop Culture Cosmos, and of course, the Lakers Fast Break. We truly appreciate you listening to all of our great shows, and if you can, please give us that 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, if you could like, share, subscribe, follow, or do whatever it is you can to support us right here at the ISFF. And of course, also the great things that we do at the Lakers Fast Break, Pop Culture Cosmos, and of course, the show among all shows that you got to get absolutely the Domination Sports Nation. Go ahead and check that out as well. If you can support all these great shows, it is sincerely appreciated. Well, it is NFL back in business. Last week, there was a flurry, a myriad of action as far as transactions are concerned, because it's that fabulous time each and every year. It's NFL free agency where teams just say, we don't want you anymore. And another team will say, we want you. I've heard the words, another man's garbage. It's, that, but obviously we don't want to deal with that. That's kind of mean spirited, whatnot. I've heard all those phrases in the past couple of weeks, but basically what it comes right down to is it is NFL free agency. Who made the moves that might help your fantasy football team win this upcoming season? Good man indeed is here with me now. He is one half of the great team for Domination Sports Nation. It is, of course, Chris Lardieri. And Chris, great to have you here. Again, another man's junk is one man's treasure, those type of proverbial things, but I understand it's very cold and mean when you say it like that, but the way that they are treated, these NFL players treated under this hard cap and the way it's structured, it kind of is like that because it does become an issue of where beauty is in the eye of the beholders.
Yeah, it definitely is. And with, agents and GMs leaking things to the, plethora of media, social media, influencers, I don't know what the term is these days. There's just so much noise out there that, it's not like the old days where a lot of this back talk and, oh, your guy's not worth it and he's asking too much kind of happened behind closed doors. And now it's out there for all of us to hear, see, and consume.
Absolutely. So, with that said and done, I want to touch on obviously the major issue and the major thing that went on as far as the running backs are concerned, because that was a huge area of change as far as running backs from one location to the other. And I know we've talked about the running back position on shows as far as the lack of emphasis on that position in recent years and the devaluing of the running back position. But obviously, it always starts with the quarterback. I guess the main highlighted move was Denver. Was it about $85 million that they've choked on in order to go ahead and get rid of Russell Wilson, who I understand he's 35, but he actually didn't have a bad season. He just had a lot of bad targets that that he was throwing to. His accuracy wasn't that bad. His touchdown interception. It reminds me of a lot of the season before Aaron Rodgers got the MVP, because it was like an under the radar season that people were saying he's slipping. It's all but done. You can all start to see him getting washed. Then Aaron Rodgers came back, had the MVP season. I'm not expecting that for Russell Wilson now that he's in a new location in Pittsburgh, but it is the highlighted free agency move of the summer.
Yeah, definitely. And with what Wilson was getting paid, albeit the Broncos ate a lot, like you said, I think that was a move they had to make. I mean, Sean Payton inherited him. He did not trade for him. He didn't advocate for him, clearly, as we saw with the benching late in the season. And on the flip side, I think from a risk reward perspective, the Steelers aren't paying him a lot. There's incentives in his contract. It's a 1 year deal. And then they go out and give up a late draft pick to get Justin Fields. So some people think, oh, is there going to be a quarterback controversy? I don't necessarily know. I personally think Wilson will be the starter, but at least they know they've got him for a year. If it doesn't work out, they've got an escape hatch, and Fields could be there next year in the waiting, or even if Wilson gets hurt or does have a poor season, they've got some insurance. So I thought that was a real interesting move by the Steelers.
It was, and also as well, Kirk Cousins, the man who has been, how should I say, man, he has been roasted for quite some time. But if you're a fantasy football owner, you are not like a Minnesota Vikings fan that has just continually just said, oh, you just had to deal with him, whatnot. He's provided some good numbers when he's been in the lineup for Minnesota. He has won me personally when I've had him in my fantasy football team a number of games. Now he heads over to the Falcons. This is the Falcons statement saying, we want to win now. We're providing you with a lot younger, more athletic, and more talented as far as wide receivers, running back, tight end, similar to what you had a few seasons ago in Minnesota. So your thoughts on Kirk Cousins, the other big name quarterback to head somewhere else?
I like the move, and a lot of people rip Kirk Cousins and cite the amount of money he makes and can't win in the prime time or a playoff game, etc. But I think from a fantasy perspective, this is good. The NFC South is weak. That's an understatement. The Falcons have a new head coach and Raheem Morris, new coaching staff, and they've got a lot of offensive talent that really didn't materialize the last few years under Arthur Smith. So if I'm a fantasy owner, I think that's good news for any Falcons players. And frankly, I think it's good for Cousins himself because I know the Buccaneers are a great story and they kept Baker Mayfield and gave him a 3-year deal. But I just think in terms of talent, the Falcons have the most of it on both sides of the ball. And, complain all you want about Cousins, his injuries, his production. Like you said, you've had him in fantasy leagues previously, and I think this bodes well for him in 2024.
A lot of expectations. Let's just get off the fantasy football thing for a second. A lot of expectations in Atlanta now with his signing, and I think also the Steelers as well. I think these are veteran quarterbacks. I don't want to say on their last legs, but on their last legs of high productivity. So they are available in the mid rounds 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They very could well be a steal for you come later this year.
Definitely. And look, the Steelers went to the playoffs and hung in with the Bills with Mason Rudolph at quarterback, and they had to win games on the stretch with Rudolph. So this is a winning team. It's a team with running back depth, wide receiver depth. We know they've got a good defense and an excellent head coach. So I don't think you could go wrong there. Now, caveat being, if you do wish to take a flyer on Wilson, you're going to have to handcuff him and have a serviceable backup. Is Fields the guy? I'm not sure. I mean, I think he showed flashes of brilliance in Chicago, and then he just showed some flat out poor play. But I just know that, given that coaching staff and the weapons he'll have around him, I think this could bode well for Fields long term. Just it's a matter of time to see if how he's going to handle being the backup and not the man in Pittsburgh.
It was indicated in Pittsburgh that he is there as the backup, and Wilson is going to be the starter initially. So we'll see what happens. But I think that both at the right circumstances, especially Kirk Cousins, I think could have a really good season. And there's some real expectations in both Atlanta and also as well Pittsburgh, as far as Joe will tell you. I wish Joe was here because he would really tell you as far as his expectations on that. He didn't hate it, he didn't love it, but he said this could be a key that helps Pittsburgh gets to where it needs to go.
And yeah, in terms of a quarterback duo, I'll take those two over Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph. So at the very least, just on paper, it's an improvement. Now, are they Super Bowl contenders? That remains to be seen.
Once again, it is Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It is Chris Ardieri along with me, Gerald Glassford. Thanks so much for watching and listening. We're talking NFL free agency and how it might affect your fantasy football decisions come later this year. And I think that you're now going to have to get a scorecard out, my friend, because the running back position was a great position of change in the past 2 weeks. So your thoughts on the best movements in running back and which teams seemingly have prospered the most?
You know, as a Giants fan, I was not surprised to see Saquon Barkley go, given what the price is and what the Eagles paid him. I know there was a lot of conjecture about, from Tiki Barber and a lot of the other hot takers in New York about, he's dead to me and how dare he. The guy just wanted to get paid. Do you blame him? It's not like, he's going to Russia to play football and bringing
And
secrets to
and
the.
these guys don't have a finite window of athleticism or a finite window of being healthy in the league, especially at running back. Because once you get into the upper 20s, once you get into your 30s, you're a persona non grata in the league for the most part. So
Yeah.
how can you blame him for trying to cash in as much as you can, as quick as you can, while you can, if you're Saquon Barkley?
Absolutely. Look at how quickly Ezekiel Elliott, after getting a big payday, was, pushed to the side for Tony Pollard in Dallas and then out to New England. But and
And Pollard.
yeah, and now Pollard got a payday in Tennessee, so I
Yes.
thought that was interesting too. So look, if Saquon stays healthy, we saw what DeAndre Swift did in Philadelphia. I mean, I know towards the end of the season that whole offense imploded, but if Barkley stays healthy, I think he's a good fit for that Eagles offense. On the flip side, one of my favorite fantasy football running backs last year led our team to the playoffs. Devin Singletary of the Texans, a much more durable running back than Barkley. Giants paid him a fraction of the price. I know some people criticized it, but I like him. Joe Shane and Brian Daboll know him from his Buffalo days, and I think that's a good signing right there. I was happy that the Giants got him. I would target him not so much as a fantasy sleeper, but a guy maybe you get in the later rounds for some good value, as opposed to reaching on someone a little too early. I like that move. I also thought Joe Mixon to the Houston Texans to replace Singletary. Mixon's been excellent with the Bengals for all his ups and downs. The guy produces with CJ Stroud there, even if it just ends up being a 1 year rental. I really like that move too for a team that's looking to make the next move from, getting into the playoffs on the last game of the season, winning a game, hanging tough with the Ravens. This is a team that's looking to make a move and become Super Bowl contenders.
We just talked about Saquon Barkley, about how uh, you got to cash in while you can, because as a running back, especially, there's only a finite amount of time where you're productive in the league. One of the most productive running backs of the past decade, Derrick Henry, has signed and actually got, even as a 30-year-old running back, a 2-year deal with the Ravens. Actually, pretty decent money for a running back, even at his age. So, your thoughts on this? Could this be a deal with very good implications, or do you think that Derrick Henry is seeing a lot of mileage, seeing a lot of yards, and may not have as much left in the tank?
Yeah, I would go with the latter, but I do think at least this year he'll probably be reinvigorated. The Ravens have an excellent offensive line. They've got Lamar Jackson, they're perennial contenders, and with Gus Edwards leaving for the LA Chargers, which is another signing I like, and not just because he and I are Rutgers Scarlet Knights. I do think Henry's the main man in Baltimore, and as long as he stays healthy, he's going to get the carries. And from an organizational perspective, that's good news for the Ravens, because I feel like with a lot of injuries and revolving door type thing at the running back position. At least they've got a clear cut number one, a guy who will produce. Now, I don't think it's going to be for the 2 or 3 years like you might get with a Saquon Barkley, but at least here in the near term, I think it's a good signing. Again, we're here to talk fantasy. I don't care about the contract, the guaranteed money, all that. My eyes glaze over and all, but just looking at who can get me points on my fantasy team, I think Henry will improve from what he did in his last year in Tennessee.
So I ask you, my friend, with all that said and done, again, a lot rides on fantasy football on the quarterback and running back positions. It's interesting to see that the Mac Jones experiment, all these experiments from earlier this decade, we're not talking 10 years ago or 5 years ago. We're talking 20, 21, 22 draft choices. A lot of them were all jettisoned out, and just by teams that have literally no patience. Mac Jones among them, as far as his name, and then like you talked about, Kenny Pickett gone. Just all these draft choices now just gone of recent days. So, your thoughts on the lack of patience that this, I guess, this cap has and creates, because if it doesn't meet your needs soon, just choke on the money, or just to choke on the part of the money that's guaranteed and just move on from there.
You have to, because as they get into that fourth and fifth year and you debate whether to extend them, to franchise them, to give them a long-term deal, to the Patriots' credit, I know there's a new regime in there now with Belichick gone, but yeah, even if Belichick were to stay, I wouldn't be surprised if they would have jettisoned Jones. It's not working. And, in the NFL, the one thing is you have a losing season, you're near at the top of the draft, you've got to get yourself a quarterback. If you miss 1 year, you've only got a few years to evaluate, and you're back in this cycle again. And I think that too, you look at a team like the Giants, I'm sure the rest of the NFL saw what, they're going through this negotiation. Daniel Jones walked away from the table, and suddenly he's got this 4-year deal, which is really a 2-year deal at about 40 million per. And a lot of teams are like, we don't want to deal with that, despite the fact that Jones got hurt on top of it. Daniel Jones is not a $40 million a year quarterback. I don't even want him on my fantasy team. So I think teams are seeing now it's better to cut bait too soon than get in that trap where you're stuck paying a guy. And that's what we saw the Bears do too with Justin Fields, frankly. Yeah, they got a draft pick in return, but for all intents and purposes, they dumped him.
One thing I do want to ask you, though, is the great story. I think one of the best stories out of free agency, or at least the signings, is someone who didn't go anywhere, but came on a very big gamble by Tampa Bay. And he just signed $100 million contract. I don't know if he'll be able to cash in all those years or whatnot, because Baker Mayfield doesn't have the greatest track record in the world, but it is a great story about him coming back. I don't want to say from the scrap heap per se, but you know what? I'm being mean. So let's say it's from the scrap heap. And I'm just say that, as Cool Bro is in the audience as a Rams fan, he knows what Baker Mayfield did. But look at him now. He had a great season last season, got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to the playoffs. And I'll tell you what, he has really started to cash in. I don't know if he'll be able to cash in all those years or restructure or whatever, because it just seems like to me by the end of his contract, something will happen. But if he has Mike Evans still there alongside of him and he can still play at a high level and he gets enough help out there, he can still play in this league. And it shows that Baker Mayfield, we thought of him and we talked about him on this show as a player who could surprise a lot of people as a pickup, as a waiver wire pickup, not only earlier this season, but also when he was subbing in for the Rams as well. I'm glad to see it's a good story. And I think it should be noted about Baker Mayfield signing a big contract.
Yeah, it is. And Baker Mayfield is not to be confused with Johnny Manziel. Mayfield had some unfortunate injuries, didn't really get the shot he deserved in Cleveland after taking that team to the playoffs. Was released by Carolina. The Rams pick him up. Sean McVay gives him a shot. He has a great Thursday night game and he ends up with the Bucks, wins that job. But you hit the nail on the head, Gerald, with Mike Evans back. I really like the way those two worked this past season. I think that is good for Baker Mayfield. And then two, a lot of these quarterbacks we're talking about here. Oh, it's not Patrick Mahomes, it's not Lamar Jackson, it's not Jalen Hurts, right? But is the drum we've been beating over the years? You need a backup quarterback in fantasy, and not only because your starter may get hurt, he may not, he may play the whole season. But what happens at the end of the season when you're in the playoffs? Oh, quarterback gets off for a week, or they're playing a cupcake team, and let's just say for argument's sake, Jalen Hurts only plays the first half. You want a guy that's in either a playoff position or fighting for a job. And down the stretch, there are a lot of teams that won playoff games, I'm sure, with Baker Mayfield at quarterback in late December, early January.
It's a great story, my friend. And I remember when Baker Mayfield came out of college, he was, the golden child. He was doing commercials. He was doing a whole bunch of things. And everybody was like, wow, he's going to be the next one. He's going to be the next great one. And it didn't quite pan out that way, did it? But look at it. He was able to resurrect his career, because we've seen so many times these quarterbacks just hang on and they bounce from team to team to team to team. All these high draft picks. I mean, you can just name a slew of them right now off the top of your head. It's good to see that Baker Mayfield, he was in that category a year ago. He is now considered a star quarterback as of now.
Yeah, the name that comes to mind is Sam Darnold, bounced around
Yes.
again, now to the Minnesota Vikings. Will he be this year's Baker Mayfield?
Garoppolo as
Exactly.
yeah.
So we'll see, but there's always one good story. Remains to be seen who that is, but yeah, I'm happy for Mayfield. I mean, I think he deserves the contract given what other quarterbacks get paid. Now I'm not going to sit here and say he's underpaid at whatever it averages out to, 33 per year, but compared to what the Dak Prescotts and Daniel Jones of the world are making, it's relatively I don't want to say inexpensive. I'll just say less expensive, but good for him. Remains to be seen if Darnold will be this year's version of Baker.
Well, it reminds me so much of Geno Smith. Last year's Geno Smith is this year's Baker Mayfield because it's such a great story where you had guys that could have easily fallen and stayed in that journeyman syndrome where you're just bouncing and you're around, you're not ever going to get another good opportunity. And when you do, it's usually in a losing situation with whoever is going to be the quarterback next, whether they get drafted, get picked up. It just never seems to work out once you lose it. But with Geno Smith last year in Seattle and this past season with Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay, it just shows to fantasy football owners that you need to keep an eye on these quarterbacks and don't automatically say they're done once they leave their original team.
Absolutely. Don't be dismissive. And, you know, even with Garoppolo, right, going to be a backup with the Rams. Matthew Stafford's still there, yeah, but he's aging. As we saw in that playoff game against the Lions, he showed some real fortitude, getting knocked around and staying in the game. But let's face it, he's already had arm issues. Jimmy Garoppolo is only an injury away from being the Rams starter. So there are a lot of guys out there to keep your eye on like that.
Yes, we did, CB. Yes, we absolutely did. That's what we were just talking about here. It is the Inside Sports Fantasy Football Show. It's Gerald Glassford along with Chris Sardieri from the Domination Sports Nation. Truly want to go ahead and thank everybody. Before we head on out, though, my friend, wide receiver, tight end, and also as far as on the defensive end, what are the other notable standout signings in your opinion? Who made out the best as far as the rest of the players that you saw?
So one acquisition that was via trade was the Giants just completely fleecing the Carolina Panthers for defensive end Brian Burns and then locking him up to a long-term deal. They've got Kayvon Thibodeau on one end. He had a nice season last year. I know there's been some skepticism about his long-term kind of future with the Giants. Is he worth the money? Is he worth the extension? But you pair him up with Burns, I think that's going to bode well for the Giants on the defensive side of the ball. Wide receiver, I think, we alluded to this earlier. Tampa keeping Mike Evans was a tremendous deal. There were a couple moves, again, not signings, that were interesting to me, and that's the Chargers. They cut Mike Williams because I know they're in cap hell, and the Jets went and picked him up. Now, I think that's a nice improvement at wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers. If he doesn't end up being vice president of the United States, at least has someone good to throw to there. And then that'll be a
If
cool
he
thing.
stays on the field, because Mike Williams and staying on the field have not always been aligned these past couple seasons.
Yeah, definitely. That's the issue with him. But I think in terms of a risk reward perspective, good signing by the Jets for once. And then the Chargers went and traded Keenan Allen to the Bears, and it looks like Caleb Williams going to be the new QB there. He's got himself a steady, solid target to throw to. So remains to be seen. Look, there's a lot of hype around Williams, but I think it'll be interesting to see how Allen materializes in Chicago opposite DJ Moore. I think that bodes well for both those guys. And then too, there's Buzzy wants a trade, but the Bengals franchising T. Higgins, I think, was an excellent move. He may be PO'd and he may want to leave tomorrow, but to get his big payday next year, I don't begrudge him that. But this is a team, as long as Joe Burrow's healthy, they should have been Super Bowl contenders this past year. I expect them to do it again this year. And, with Higgins and Jamar Chase, those guys are always going to be dangerous fantasy football receivers.
Once again, it is the Inside Sports Fantasy Football Show. It's Gerald Glassford along with Chris Sardieri. Before we head on out, my friend, as you mentioned, a lot was going on as far as free agency, a lot of transactions, a lot of movement. Again, I noted a lot regarding the running backs. If you are preparing for your team, I'd say in August, late July, start looking into where these players are and how things will take shape in training camp. But before we head it out, my friend, your winners and your losers as far as teams go in NFL free agency.
I think a loser has to be the Raiders. They really haven't addressed the quarterback issue. I mean, this is no newsflash here to any of us, but they got Gardner Minshew. He's a good backup. I mean, he's a spot starter at best, but I know they weren't going to keep Garoppolo at that price. But there was some buzz. They were in the Justin Fields running. I honestly think that probably would have had more upside than Minshew, unless there's something we don't know. And the Raiders are working on a trade to get up to one of these top three guys coming out of college, but I don't see that happening necessarily. And then you're gonna waste another year of Devonte Adams at that contract with no one to throw to him.
Oh, he'll be mad. He'll be incensed. He'll be absolutely ticked off. I can already see it already.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Then on the winner's side, I alluded to the Texans earlier. Not only what they did with Mixon, but you look at what they did in the draft last year. Yeah, they gave up a pick that Arizona will inherit this year, but that is a team that really overachieved and cap wise had some room and made some acquisitions. I think they're locked and loaded. And getting back to the running backs, one we forgot about was Aaron Jones went to the Vikings because Josh Jacobs went to the Packers. I like Jacobs. I think with that's a team on the rise with Love at quarterback. I really like that move there. So that was another one I think that's positive for a team that's poised to make a playoff run as well. And I alluded to what the Giants did. Just taking my fan hat off here, I should say. I do like the moves they made, but it's all for naught if Daniel Jones either isn't 100% or has another mediocre season. But in terms of a grading perspective for GM Joe Shane, I like the acquisitions they did. They had some cap issues. They made things work and fit. So as a fan, a little optimistic about the Giants there. But again, I think just on paper, you've got to be impressed with what the Falcons did just by getting Cousins. Whether they overpaid or not, I'm not going to argue with that here. But this is a put up or shut up year. And if they don't win with all that talent on the offensive side of the ball, I don't know what Arthur Blank's going to do.
I will say this. Please take note that this could be the first time in maybe over a calendar year, maybe more, that Chris has had anything nice to say about his beloved New York Giants. So I just want to make sure
Yeah.
everybody takes note of that. I kind of was thrown back there for a second because I thought I had to clean my ears or check my headphones or something because, wow. Yeah, actually, he did say something about the New York Giants. Wow. I'm amazed.
Yeah, as much as it pains me to say it at times. I like what they did, but then again, this Saquon leaving for the Eagles all spills over from the Giants deciding to franchise him last year and give Daniel Jones the money. So now all the skeptics, the second guessers, the hindsight's 2020 crew are saying, well, maybe you should have locked Saquon up and locked in Jones for one more year, put up or shut up year. So don't know if that's a right or wrong answer, but this whole Daniel Jones thing may even be a bigger mess if the Giants do indeed wind up with a quarterback. We'll see what happens.
It is, of course, Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford along with Chris Sardieri. But before we head on out, I want to go ahead and make sure Chris has his platform to go ahead and shout out exactly what is going on with the Domination Sports Nation.
The Domination Sports Nation podcast, wherever you find your podcasts, it is spelled Dom-in-Nation Sports Nation. My son and I do a show. He came to me during the pandemic and said, Dad, I want to do a podcast. How do we do it? So the first person I contacted was my good friend Gerald here, and the rest is history. 4 years later, we've been on a little bit of hiatus between Dom's tests and schoolwork and track and spring break arriving, but we are going to be back on the air soon. And we've got plenty to talk about besides NFL free agency. We got Shohei Ohtani and his interpreter, bookie, wire transfer guy. I mean, that's a whole mess.
Bet
Yeah.
on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know. DraftKings may be doing promotions with Shohei soon, but I digress. We've got March Madness was started today. Huge upset already. Oakland beating number 3 seed Kentucky. You'll know there'll be more of that over this weekend, so we'll be talking about that. And I don't know if you noticed this, Gerald, but Major League Baseball kind of snuck in this opening day out of South Korea between the Dodgers and
Mhm.
the Padres, and no one,
Ironically.
no, yeah, no one on the West Coast could watch it because it was at 3 a.m. So the real MLB opening day is coming up. So give our previews there, and as much as you love when I bash the Giants, I'll be sure to bash my New York Yankees, and they deserve it too.
What about Blake Snell? I was talking to Joe on that. I thought that would have been an easy thing for the Dodgers to go ahead and after, especially because part of the reason Otani interpreter stealing money aside, and now that's just going to get that plot is going to get even thicker here with what's going on there and the investigation they're in. But him deferring money was to go and make sure that the team would go out and get enough players. And Yamamoto have had some other great signings. I get that, but I thought Blake Snell, and again, this comes from someone who was a longtime Dodger fan. I may get back into them. I don't know, but Joe's trying hard to push me into that, and some family members as well. But I thought Blake Snell going to the Giants was a coup for the Giants, even though it's only for 2 years. I thought it was a very smart move, just to keep him away from the Dodgers.
Yeah, it was, given the fact that it's only 2 years. I think the big loser was not Snell, but it was his agent, Scott Boras, who's got, a number of clients that aren't even signed yet, and, was just buzzing about how they were going to get these huge long-term deals that never materialized. I think with the Dodgers and Snell, there are two things at play. You mentioned it. One, they signed Yamamoto to a big deal. Even with the deferred money in Otani, I mean, you've got to kind of be picky and selective where you're going to spend the rest of that money before the payroll gets completely out of control and you're into these ridiculous luxury tax payments. And then two, I know Snell won the Cy Young, but this is a guy who his kind of workload, his trajectory has not been good. He'll give you a good 6 innings, but he's had control issues. He doesn't really pitch as many innings as he used to, throws a lot of pitches. So maybe they're just worried about the wear and tear of the arm. And even at a 2 year deal, just thinking, we'd rather invest in some of our young pitchers or sign and keep the ones we have.
It is, of course, Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford along with my good friend, Mr. Chris Sardieri. I want to go ahead and mention before we go a very somber and sad moment for this show because one of the great radio stations that we did play on, someone who actually asked and inquired and really was adamant about getting the show on his station was Croc Radio's own Buddy Gold, who was the station manager and owner of Croc Radio in Canada. And I'm very sad to say that in recent times, I'm sorry, according to family members, he has passed and passed away recently. So, on behalf of all of us at ISFF, Pop Culture Cosmos, Lakers Fast Break, and also as well, of course, I can safely assume as well from Domination Sports Nation, Chris, we offer our family, our family to his family, the deepest of condolences and best wishes going forward.
Absolutely. When you sent the message today, really hit me hard. And honestly, I had only met Buddy through you maybe August, September of last year when he wanted to feature the Domination Sports Nation on Croc, and speaking with him, well, not literally, but on Messenger. Nice guy, funny, fan of the Boston Celtics. I'll never hold that against him. He's still a good guy. But he gave us a shot. I put all our shows on the air up there and really liked it. And I'd throw my file into Dropbox thanks to Dom's technical expertise and hear back from him. Got it. Sounds good. And it was on to the next show. And I know you knew him a little longer and a little better, but just sad. A guy who really believed in, for lack of a better term, us little guys here in the podcast world, and featuring us up in Canada, which was even cooler. It's a sad day to say the least. Completely agree.
So, on behalf of everyone here, again, our best wishes to the family of Buddy Gold. Buddy, rest in peace. You'll always be loved and appreciated by all of us right here on Pop Culture Cosmos, Domination Sports Nation, and also as well Inside Sports Fantasy Football.